Humanity has pulled off some truly mind-bending stuff in modern medicine. Think about it. We're literally doing robotic heart surgery, we're editing the human genome, and we can even train the immune system to hunt down cancer cells. But when it comes to one of our most fundamental medical needs, blocking severe pain, we are faced with this massive, glaring paradox. Our absolute best, most effective tools for killing pain today are fundamentally identical to the highly addictive molecules we were using way back in the 1800s. We basically have to drug the entire human brain just to get the body to stop hurting. But a biotechnology startup called Latigo Biotherapeutics is on a mission to completely disrupt this outdated medical paradigm. And that brings us to a really big, hovering question. Can we actually kill severe pain without causing addiction? For decades, the pharmaceutical industry honestly thought this might be impossible. They basically assumed that the pathways for pain relief and the pathways for addiction were just so tightly intertwined in the brain that you couldn't possibly have one without the other. But what if the solution isn't in the brain at all? Keep that question in the back of your mind because the technological solution we're about to explore is nothing short of fascinating. To really wrap your head around why a startup would even tackle something this incredibly difficult, you kind of have to grasp the sheer staggering scale of the pain management market. 250 million. That's the estimated number of pain prescriptions written annually in the United States alone. Just pause and think about that for a second. We're talking about hundreds of millions of touch points every single year where a patient is handed a bottle of pills just to get through a surgery recovery or to manage their chronic joint pain. And why this matters so incredibly much is because the entrenched standard of care for these hundreds of millions of prescriptions still relies heavily on opioids. The opioid crisis gets talked about a lot as a policy failure or a regulatory failure, but fundamentally, it's a technology failure. Doctors have basically been forced to overprescribe these highly addictive medications simply because there's been a complete lack of viable, fast-acting, highly effective alternative treatments. The societal and economic costs have been just catastrophic, all because the underlying technology hasn't evolved. So let's break down the difference. Think of traditional opioids like going down to your basement and shutting off the main circuit breaker for your entire house just because one single light bulb in the kitchen is broken. Opioids flood the central nervous system. They cross the blood-brain barrier, and yeah, they stop the pain for sure, but they also cause sedation, respiratory depression, euphoria, and ultimately, addiction. Latigo's approach is entirely different. Instead of shutting down the whole house, they just want to unscrew that one broken light bulb. They're targeting the peripheral nerves, the actual source of the pain signal out in the body, before it ever even reaches the brain. Okay, so the specific biological target that makes this whole new approach possible is called NaV 1.8. It's a voltage-gated sodium channel. When your body gets injured, these little channels open up like microscopic gates. They allow sodium to rush in and trigger a pain signal that fires right up to your brain like a biological alarm system. But here is the absolute genius part. NaV 1.8 is expressed almost exclusively in your peripheral pain-sensing neurons. It's not in your brain, it's not in your heart. So if you can intelligently block this one specific channel, you can stop the pain right at the source, entirely avoiding those brain-altering side effects. Latigo's growth journey? It is a textbook, incredible case study on how to scale a biotech. They secured their early foundational intellectual property from the Lieber Institute for Brain Development back in 2018. By 2020, they were officially incubated and operationalized by Westlake Village Biopartners. Then they spent a few years grinding away in stealth mode, quietly building out their tech, before publicly emerging in early 2024. And by mid-2026, they had already filed for a NASDAQ IPO. Going from a stealth incubator project to a high-profile public offering in that kind of time frame requires some intensely focused execution. But how did they move so unbelievably fast? Well, here's some absolutely fascinating startup lore for you. Building a world-class drug discovery lab from scratch usually takes years. You have to hire chemists, biologists, assay specialists, and then somehow get them all to work together smoothly. But Latigo caught a massive break. Around late 2019, the pharmaceutical giant Amgen underwent a strategic realignment and actually divested its neuroscience wing. Latigo saw this opening and aggressively swooped in, effectively absorbing Amgen's highly experienced, pre-assembled neuroscience talent pool. This essentially became the ultimate startup shortcut. It's been noted that by absorbing this pre-integrated group of ion channel chemists, Latigo was able to quickly build out its in-house infrastructure. Think about it. By bringing in a ready-made world-class team that literally already knew how to work together, they bypassed years of corporate setup. They were able to instantly iterate on their drug discovery and jump light years ahead of the competition. That massive talent acquisition allowed them to build what they call their discovery engine. And this isn't just your standard trial-and-error chemistry. They actually start by studying people with rare genetic mutations who literally cannot feel pain because their NAV 1.8 channels naturally just don't work. Then they combine that human genetic validation with AI, machine learning, and structure-based design to engineer tiny small molecules, testing them on advanced in-house patch clamp electrophysiology. It is a remarkably sophisticated, tightly integrated tech stack. But wait a second. Targeting sodium channels isn't exactly a brand new idea. So what actually makes Latigo's molecular approach fundamentally different? Well, historically, attempts to make non-selective sodium blockers failed miserably because they accidentally block the channels that keep your heart beating or your brain functioning. Even early attempts at targeting NAV 1.8 specifically really struggled because the drugs just couldn't bind effectively. Latigo's chemistry team had to solve a massive structural puzzle to make their drug both completely safe and highly effective. It all comes down to a really cool concept called state-independent binding. Let's go back to an analogy. Think of the pain channel like a door. Previous drugs tried to shove a wedge under the door while it was already swinging open, which, as you can imagine, is really hard to do reliably. Latigo's molecules, on the other hand, bind to the outside of the door frame, the extracellular cleft, and they essentially lock the deadbolt. They stabilize the deactivated state, preventing the channel from opening in the first place, regardless of what state it's currently in. That fundamental difference in chemistry is exactly what gives their drug its power. Now, of course, brilliant chemistry only matters if it actually, works in human beings. Enter LTG-001, which is Latigo's lead drug candidate for acute pain. To prove this actually worked, they ran a rigorous phase 2b clinical trial on patients recovering from abdominoplasty, which is a major surgery known to cause severe pain. The results were so incredibly compelling that they were published as an original research article in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. Getting into the NEGM is massive validation. It's basically the holy grail of peer-reviewed clinical proof. In these clinical pain trials, efficacy is measured by a score called SPID-48, which basically tracks pain reduction over a 48-hour window. And the high-dose cohort of LTG-001 hit a massive 62.1. To put that into perspective, this represents the highest analgesic or pain-killing effect ever reported for any tested drug in this specific published post-surgical model. So the drug didn't just work, it worked extraordinarily well. Plus, when you're in agonizing pain after a surgery, you don't just want relief, you want immediate relief, right? Well, in a direct comparison during the trial, patients taking Latigo's drug achieved a median onset of meaningful pain relief in just 52 minutes. The patients taking Vicodin, which is a standard, highly addictive opioid, didn't get meaningful relief for 83 minutes. So Latigo's non-addictive molecule was actually significantly faster than the standard opioid. But the ultimate goal here isn't just to slightly reduce pain. The real goal is to stop people from needing opioids entirely. Over 52% of the patients taking the high dose of LTG-001 remained completely opioid-free for the entire 48-hour period after their major surgery. Compare that to just 22% on the placebo. The drug successfully reduced the need for rescue opioids by an absolute landscape. So the clinical takeaways here were just huge. Statistically significant pain reduction across the board, a 50% greater effect than the opioids they compared it to, lower side effects, and a totally clear dose-response curve, proving the drug was truly driving the effect. The startup's rigorous AI-driven science successfully translated into highly effective real-world benefits for patients. Now, any deep dive into this space absolutely has to address the elephant in the room, and that is Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Vertex is a massive pharma company, and recently they actually got the very first NaV 1.8 inhibitor called Journavax approved by the FDA. Now, you might initially think this is bad news for a scrappy startup like Latigo, but in the biotech world, it's actually the exact opposite. Vertex just validated the exact biological target and paved the complex regulatory pathway for this entirely new class of drugs. So Latigo isn't looking at Vertex's approval as a defeat at all. In fact, they're framing it as a massive opportunity. Sure, Vertex has the first-to-market advantage, but based on Latigo's own clinical data, highlighting that faster onset and really robust efficacy, they are aggressively positioning LTG-001 to be the best-in-class competitor. And in massive pharmaceutical markets, being the superior, slightly later arrival is often a highly lucrative strategy. Up to this point, we've really only been talking about acute pain, like recovering from a surgery or maybe getting your wisdom teeth pulled. But what about the millions of people out there suffering every single day from long-term ailments? Can this technology treat chronic pain too? If you can solve chronic pain without addiction, you literally unlock one of the largest commercial opportunities in modern medicine. Well, Latigo is definitely not a one-trick pony. While their first drug heads into late-stage trials for acute pain, they have LTG-321, which is specifically designed for chronic pain. And waiting right in the wings is a preclinical wildcard. They are systematically attacking entirely different segments of the pain market with specialized molecules. Because treating chronic pain, that requires a completely different engineering mindset than acute pain. An acute drug really only needs to be taken for a few days, but a chronic drug needs to be safe, tolerable, and convenient enough for a patient to take every single day, potentially for years. You're engineering for the long haul. So, why does this specific drug matter so much for something like osteoarthritis of the knee? Mainly because it features a structurally distinct chemical scaffold from their first drug. This unique structure allows for lower effective dosing requirements, which is absolutely crucial for long-term safety. And most importantly, it's designed for convenient once-daily oral administration. For the massive aging demographic dealing with daily joint pain, a safe, non-opioid, once-a-day pill is a total game-changer. And then there's LTG-418. This is the wild card. By using their structural discovery engine, Latigo engineered a molecule so remarkably potent that it requires a vastly lower dose to achieve the exact same pain-blocking effect. And when you shrink the physical size of the dose that much, you open up entirely new ways to administer it. Because it requires such a tiny active dose, they're exploring delivery methods way beyond just swallowing a pill. We are talking about targeted topical gels, transdermal patches you can just slap right on your back, ophthalmic eye drops for post-eye surgery, and local injectables. Imagine being able to deliver non-addictive, extreme pain relief precisely to the 1 square inch of your body that actually hurts. Of course, advancing multiple complex drugs into pivotal, late-stage trials takes serious scale, which prompted Latigo's recent NASDAQ IPO filing. Going public is designed to rapidly fuel these trials, allowing them to finally cross that finish line from being a scrappy biotech startup to a full-blown commercial-stage pharmaceutical disruptor. And they've assembled a total powerhouse executive team to pull this off. CEO Nima Farzan is a seasoned expert in scaling biotechs and navigating public markets. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Neil Singla is literally a pioneer in designing the exact types of pain trials Latigo is running. And Dr. Brian Moyer, their SVP of Discovery, brings all of that legacy Amgen innovation right into their chemistry engine. This is absolutely a team built for commercialization. Their ambition is totally clear. They stated, "We aim to build one of the broadest pipelines of pain therapeutics to deliver meaningful patient benefit and to change the current treatment paradigm." They aren't just trying to launch one lucky drug. They are actively leveraging their cutting-edge chemistry to build an entire platform aimed at permanently changing how healthcare handles pain. Ultimately, Latigo is proving that a smarter approach to our biological alarm system is actually possible. By targeting the peripheral nerves directly through that NaV1.8 channel, we can intelligently mute the body's pain alarms without flooding the central nervous system. We really don't have to rewire the entire brain just to fix a broken light bulb in the body. So, what will the medical landscape actually look like when opioids are finally a thing of the past? If Latigo succeeds, we are standing right on the brink of a new era where severe pain can be switched off safely, rapidly, and without the devastating shadow of addiction. It is a massive technological challenge for sure, but the science is already here and it is moving incredibly fast. Keep an eye on Latigo's journey. It's definitely one you won't want to miss. Latigo Biotherapeutics, the $1.2 billion non-opioid IPO teardown. They are stepping right up to the plate with a massive proposed public offering, and honestly, the stakes couldn't be higher. We're talking about a direct, aggressive challenge to the multi-billion-dollar acute pain market, a sector that has historically been dominated by cheap opioids and more recently newly approved non-opioid incumbents. It's a high-wire act of clinical data and aggressive capitalization, and the mechanics of this deal tell a fascinating story about the future of pain management. So let's look at the target. $1.2 billion. That is the fully diluted market valuation they're aiming for. Filing to list on the NASDAQ under the proposed ticker LTGO, Latigo wants to pull in a $272 million gross raise. Now, securing a billion-dollar valuation in today's tight pre-revenue biotech market, that takes immense institutional conviction, and that conviction is exactly what is driving this NASDAQ listing. The IPO value proposition. That institutional conviction we just mentioned is entirely rooted in the mechanics of this deal. Let's break down the offering itself. We're looking at 16 million shares priced somewhere between $16 and $18 apiece. If we look right at the midpoint, Latigo is bringing in roughly $247 million in net proceeds. And with heavy-hitting joint book runners like Goldman Sachs, Jefferies, Leerink Partners, and Guggenheim Securities managing the deal, this capital injection isn't just a cash grab. It's highly strategic. It's explicitly designed to fund their clinical operations and secure a solid cash runway straight through the second half of 2028. Now, the biological moat backing up that $1.2 billion valuation rests entirely on targeting NaV 1.8. What is that? Well, it's a voltage-gated sodium channel expressed predominantly in peripheral sensory neurons. Think of it like this. When the body gets injured, these proteins act like blaring alarm bells sending pain signals straight to the brain. By selectively inhibiting NaV 1.8, Latigo is basically cutting the wire on that alarm at the peripheral source. It bypasses the central nervous system completely. And that means it fundamentally avoids the addiction liability, the heavy sedation, and the respiratory risks we always see with traditional opioids. Clinical data and efficacy. Because, as we know, Wall Street doesn't just buy a cool biological theory. They demand hard clinical evidence. And that evidence actually arrived back in July 2026. The New England Journal of Medicine published peer-reviewed Phase 2b data for Latigo's lead asset, LTG-001. The investigators made a pretty bold claim here. They stated this was, quote, the highest analgesic effect reported for any analgesic tested in the abdominoplasty pain model to our knowledge. That is a massive clinical anchor for their entire IPO narrative. If we look at those rigorous Phase 2b trial numbers, the primary efficacy endpoint they used is the SPID-48 score, which is the summed pain intensity difference over a 48-hour period. The high-dose cohort of LTG-001 achieved a staggering 62.1. To put that in perspective, the active opioid comparator, Vicodin, scored just 40.9. So Latigo's non-opioid asset delivered roughly 50% greater pain reduction than the literal standard of care. Even their low-dose cohort demonstrated a very clear, statistically significant dose response. But if we isolate the most commercially viable selling point, the metric prescribers and payers really care about, it brings the focus squarely to the opioid-sparing effect. Over a 48-hour post-surgical window, 52.3% of the patients receiving high-dose LTG-101 required absolutely zero rescue opioids. Zero. Compare that to just 22.1% in the placebo group. For insurers and hospital systems desperate to reduce total opioid consumption, this stat is arguably more important than the primary pain score itself. Plus, in immediate post-surgical settings, speed is a crucial operational edge. LTG-001 achieved a median onset of meaningful analgesia in just 52 minutes. The active opioid comparator? It didn't reach that threshold until 83 minutes. Latigo's drug doesn't just hit significantly harder, it acts significantly faster. Competitive positioning. Because to actually justify that billion-dollar valuation, Latigo must prove this clinical edge can scale against the broader market. Let's look at the current heavyweight. Earlier this year, Vertex Pharmaceuticals secured FDA approval for JOURNAVX, which effectively validated the NV 1.8 pathway and opened up this multi-billion-dollar track. But Latigo is not playing for second place. Right in their S1 filing, they objectively and directly challenge Vertex, claiming that JOURNAVX is limited by moderate efficacy, slow onset, and clinical contraindications. Latigo is aggressively positioning LTG-11 as the best-in-class successor, making those faster onset and superior efficacy claims the absolute bedrock of their market strategy. Pipeline expansion strategy. Now, acute surgical pain is really just the beachhead here. The true multi-billion-dollar prize lies in the massive, long-term addressable market of chronic pain. And this is where Latigo's pipeline multiplier, LTG-321, completely changes the math. This asset is structurally distinct from LTG-001, and it's aimed squarely at chronic musculoskeletal pain with osteoarthritis of the knee as its lead indication. What makes LTG-321 so lucrative is its expected pharmacokinetic profile. It's designed to require a much lower once-daily dose. That kind of convenience factor is perfectly tailored for patients who are managing chronic, lifelong conditions. Moving beyond traditional oral pills, we also have Latigo's preclinical asset LTG-418, which requires even lower doses. This opens the door to localized, alternative non-oral formulations. We're talking topical gels, transdermal patches, eye drops, and injectables. It proves this is an entire NaV 1.8 platform, not just a one-trick single-drug company. Capital structure and runway. Because building out an ambitious, multi-asset pipeline like that takes a massive amount of capital. Looking at their capitalization history, Latigo has been highly aggressive. They came out of stealth mode with over $135 million in Series A funding, backed by Westlake Village Bio Partners and 5AM Ventures. They followed that up with a massive $150 million Series B in 2025, led by Blue Owl Capital. And now, as we know, they are targeting $272 million in gross proceeds from the public markets. That is some heavy, sustained institutional backing ahead of a public debut. But let's be real, the financial realities of a pre-revenue biotech are always pretty stark. In 2025, Latigo posted a massive $109.2 million net loss. They are carrying an accumulated deficit of $266 million. And as of June 2026, their cash equivalents were sitting at just $54.8 million. So for a company running incredibly expensive late-stage trials, this IPO isn't just a nice strategic milestone, it is a strict mathematical necessity just to keep the lights on. Mapping out their critical execution timeline shows exactly why they need that cash right now. Latigo is initiating a Phase 3 bunionectomy trial for LTG-001 in the second half of 2026. Bunionectomy is the FDA's preferred acute pain surgical model. Then the pivotal top-line data readouts for both LTG-001 and the chronic pain asset LTG-321 are expected in the second half of 2027. This IPO cash is perfectly calculated to bridge the gap right through those key readouts, extending their runway until the second half of 2028. Investment risks and challenges. Naturally, every single pre-revenue biotech investment carries significant market hurdles, and the risk matrix here is dense. First, you're looking at a zero-revenue balance sheet paired with a very high cash burn rate. Then you've got intense, deeply resourced first-mover competition from Vertex Pharmaceuticals. You also have the inherent execution risks of running a massive Phase 3 trial. But honestly, perhaps the biggest hurdle is payer coverage uncertainty. Even if LTG-001 gets approved, unseating cheap, generic opioids is incredibly difficult. Insurers are notoriously reluctant to pay premium prices for a novel non-opioid when generic Vicodin literally costs pennies a pill. So, is the non-opioid pain market large enough to sustain both Vertex's established first-mover advantage and Latigo's clinical edge? It leaves us pondering the ultimate sector dynamics. Latigo clearly possesses unprecedented clinical data and a really compelling biological thesis. But will LTG-001 actually disrupt the standard of care? Or is it going to find itself boxed out by the sheer financial gravity of the pharmaceutical establishment? Well, the data readouts in 2027 are going to hold that answer.